Welcome, everybody. Happy Tuesday to everyone. My name is Ryan Edelman from Phoenix Energy Technologies. Today, we're going to be talking about solving energy demand management challenges in enterprise businesses. Just really very quickly, again, my name is Ryan Edelman. I manage corporate development and business development for Phoenix Energy Technologies. If you're not familiar with us, Phoenix, we provide, I'll talk a little bit more about us here in a minute, but let's just jump into the agenda really quickly. Today, we've got a lot of content and some awesome speakers who've been generous enough to come join us. In the first part, we're going to talk a little bit more about the current state of demand response in 2022, each year being a little bit more nuanced. DR challenges and opportunities that face specifically enterprise businesses. These are businesses with multiple regional or national footprints, and then emerging trends related to DR in enterprise. And then in the second part, we'll start to hear from some specific experts, an overview of how DR has changed in recent years, and we'll talk about some examples about how enterprises can capitalize on these changes. And we'll hear from actually a real customer in Art Justice from Cinemark, and talk a little bit about their journey. And then the last piece, very briefly, we'll talk a little bit about, how can you, as someone who's involved in an enterprise, get started in taking advantage of these opportunities. So with that said, just very quickly, who is Phoenix? If you're not familiar with us, we are an innovator in IoT and smart buildings and connected machines. We help facilities and energy management teams and facility management teams proactively manage thousands of locations of buildings from a single unified platform using existing devices like legacy building automation systems or meters or any other connected devices, as opposed to installing any kind of new devices. We service Fortune 100 customers in retail and grocery and healthcare and entertainment. And we've been providing these solutions to our customers for upwards of 15 years so far. From the technology provider's perspective as it relates to DR, just some commentary on where we see our customers, the types of things they undertake to be able to maximize the DR potential. And they fall into kind of 5 buckets. And that is, first, you need to understand the market opportunities. Align yourself with partners who can curate a list of relevant DR opportunities. In many cases, there are dozens and dozens of programs across the country. It can be very difficult, especially if you have a large regional or national footprint, to say, which of these opportunities are relevant to me, should I pay attention to? Use those partners to help you understand the program nuances, the value, the requirements, the enrollment dates. When should I be taking action? We'll hear from James McPhail a little bit later, who's one of our partners at Enersponse, who really helps our customers start to create some crosshairs on the opportunities that make the most sense. Second piece is forget kind of old notions or old barriers that you may have had related to DR. There are no more 4 or 6 hour commitments. We can chunk up small pieces of curtailment that make sure you maintain comfort in your sites when you have a portfolio of buildings. Leverage a DR implementation partner who's also responsible for occupant comfort and inventory integrity, so that you're aligning incentives. Kind of third piece, but relative to the second piece, is removing those technical roadblocks. Don't assume that you have to install new equipment to participate in DR programs or any kind of grid event. Aggregate and manage events from a single platform. It makes it much easier to participate, rather than ripping replace controls or trying to develop a program if you have 5 different building automation systems to respond. And finally, and this kind of goes with all things, but in particular, find the free money. Leverage your partners to do that kind of gritty, unsexy administrative work of tracking down all the different incentives that exist out there for what we would call DR controls modernization. There's a lot of money out there to be able to apply to these types of programs, and we can, and with our partners, can help you get after it. The last piece that I think we'll do a little show and tell here is that, again, the role that we play here, and as you'll learn a little bit more about later, is the technological layer that we provide as Phoenix, removing that technical roadblock. So we have a product called Demand Manager that is agnostic to the building automation infrastructure, and we can send signals and develop DR curtailment strategies that can be pushed to thousands of sites simultaneously from one single platform. That makes it much easier for our partners like James, who we'll talk a little bit later, to be able to implement programs and send signals, and it makes it much easier for folks like Art who have broad portfolios with multiple different controls to participate. With that said, I want to bring one of our partners in here, Colin Greer of GEM Consulting, who's an expert in demand management and also works with enterprise businesses, to tell you a little bit more about DR in 2022. Colin?
Thanks, Ryan. So we at GEM, we offer energy management and sustainability consulting services to help our customers drive cost savings and increasingly meet ESG goals and tell the sustainability story. We have a suite of services, and really we act as an extension of the customer's internal energy or facility teams to do more and to do it faster. So today, we're going to talk about demand management and demand response. Ryan, if you want to transition us to the next slide here. Just to level set, demand response is going to be a program where a customer is going to reduce their energy usage during a peak period as defined by the utility or grid that you're contracting with. So knowing that, there's really two different program types. There's a manual demand response program where there is a email communication that's going to go from the entity running the program to the support team. And then it's on you to put in the controls changes in the energy management system to actually curtail. And then there's ADR, automated demand response, where there's a connection built between the utility and the site to where when the signal goes up, the changes are automatically made. They're automatically run through, and there's nothing that you have to do other than monitor performance. So knowing that, there's also a difference in how you're paid. So at the grid level, the ERCOT, PJM markets, you're going to receive a check, and that's typically how they prefer to give reimbursement. Whereas at a utility level, a lot of those programs show up as a line item on your utility bill, where your DR payment is going to count against your current electricity usage, electricity cost. And then the final piece here that's really important when we're talking about demand response, as Ryan touched on, is the support team. There's really three pieces. There's a technology solution that allows you to physically control the energy loads on site. That's critical. There's a support team that handles the administrative burden, the enrollment, the actual controls changes, all of that. And then finally, the curtailment service provider, or the CSP, that you actually have to contract with to participate in many of these programs. So, thinking about national accounts, there can be a lot of challenges just to get it to a point where you can execute. Really boiled this down to four. The first thing, it starts with working site level controls and having central command of all of those locations. In order to participate, this is just a barrier for entry. You have to have this. They're not going to allow you to, hey, we'll just call up the site and tell them to go to flip a switch. It's not going to work. So that's really important to start there. The next step is defining a curtailment strategy that fits your business. So as Ryan has mentioned, a lot of things have changed over the last few years. You don't have to, I remember a time when it felt like you had to augment your lighting load, or they didn't want to talk to you. That's just not the case anymore. There's a lot more flexibility to do more. And a restaurant is going to have a different decision matrix than a retail location. So it's just important to come up with what works for your business. We've talked about the support team. Internal resources can be hard to come by. So just making sure you have the right resources to get it done. And then finally, internal buy-in. A lot of my experience comes from retail. So when you talk about, hey, at peak sales periods, we're going to turn half the lights off. They don't like that. They won't, a lot of those guys, they don't want to trade one expense dollar, 10 expense dollars if it's one sales that's impacted. So just telling that story of, look, it doesn't impact anything. It's a very targeted effort, and getting the internal stakeholders to get on board is very important. So as I mentioned just a second ago, there have been a lot of changes in demand response programs over the last few years. And the number one thing it feels like with all energy management related things is the relevance to your ESG and sustainability strategy. So it's important to talk about things like grid resiliency. When you are curtailing and you are reducing the stress on the grid, you are directly enabling people's houses to be powered, the utility to address these concerns and make sure everybody can stay and have power. So that's part of it. Increasingly, these providers are able to provide emissions reports, so you can see event specific what your emissions reduction is. It may not be huge, but if you can layer on an emissions reduction report on top of cost savings, it becomes more compelling and it becomes a piece of the story you're trying to tell. Another really interesting kind of developments we've seen are emergent technologies, enabling more precision in managing peak demand. When we talk about these kind of programs, the idea is you want to curtail as little as possible to drive the most savings. So James is going to get into this next, and that's really what his company does, is making sure that you're being as strategic and targeted as you can be. Another very important piece here is merging demand response participations with other demand management programs. So what I mean by that is demand response is really one of the first steps within a larger demand management strategy. So there are things like, if you've got a portfolio of locations across the country, every utility is going to charge you for energy differently. So if you can identify all of the line items tied to your monthly peak demand, you can identify, okay, well, at this location, if I can reduce my peak demand by this much, I should see a savings on the bill. So the idea here is that once you get everything in place for demand response, you can stack on increasingly complex programs to drive more savings with the exact same strategy that you have in place now. So you get the efficiencies of scale as you hone and optimize that strategy. And then one of the other things we've seen that's been really interesting is the introduction of winter demand response programs. So we've all seen in the news what's happened in Texas. CenterPoint has responded and they've created a winter demand response program. So it will be interesting to see how utilities meet capacity issues, because demand response is one of the cheaper ways to do it. It's a lot cheaper to know that for X dollars, I can buy this capacity on this day than build a very expensive generation asset that you don't use that often. So, you think about pipeline constraints in the Northeast, the issues in Texas, California, it's going to be here. So if you get everything in place, you can take advantage of very quickly programs like what we saw last summer in California. Governor Newsom issued an emergency proclamation last year. I think you had to be like at least 1 megawatt in, it was either peak demand or curtailment potential. So this was aimed at industrial customers, but he ordered the utilities to pay customers $2 per kilowatt hour that they cut during these periods. So if you had everything in place, if you qualified, it's as easy as calling your support team and saying, hey, how do we make sure we take advantage of this, next week? Because $2 per kilowatt hour it's a pretty good incentive. So again, yeah, it's being able to have everything in place to be mobile and react to market conditions. So with that, Ryan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. That was very helpful. I forgot to mention a little bit at the beginning. If you do have questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. We'll be monitoring those also in recording this. So anything that we miss from a Q&A or that we don't address at the end, where we address Q&A, we'll be able to follow up. So I wanted to mention that. But without further ado, we'd like to introduce James McPhail, who's the CEO of Enersponse. James.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, and thanks for having us. And for anyone on the call who's not yet familiar with us, Enersponse is it's probably easier just to describe what we do. We take market pricing, we take program signals, we take weather data, and we bring that into our platform to dispatch things like demand response, or even in some cases it's price response. So you're responding to a real-time price in the market, or even demand charge management. So to Colin's point, we certainly leverage that demand response mechanism, but once you set that automation up, we try to exercise the other things that you can do with that automation to earn money, save money, or just purely avoid costs. So the focus here on the first slide is really just demand response, that getting your first foot in there. And to Ryan's point earlier, historically, these programs have not been all that friendly to multi-site organizations. They've been set up for large facilities that can pull down that megawatt of load, like California was looking for. It was a manual process of, in some cases, there was a hotline, a red phone that got rang, and you got that call and you knew to go shut down load. Which obviously doesn't make sense in a multi-site organization, because or else you're just going to have 1,000 phones out there. But they were long events, and they caused probably even a lot of you on this call, and even Art, to not be able to participate in demand response events, because you're probably okay for the first hour or 2, 3 hours, but really once you get into those 4, 5, 6 hour long events, people get hot, customers walk out, employees complain. And there's just a bunch of heavy admin. You think about, I think Ryan mentioned dozens of programs out there, right? There's programs all over the place. Some aggregator programs, some not. So just a lot of admin to even figure out, where are the programs? Which ones do I fit in? Which ones do I not? So what we've done is we've basically taken those pain points, and go to the next slide, and we're talking about exactly what we've done to solve for those. So what we do at Enersponse is it's a single source enrollment, meaning we absolutely, and we'll show a map, but we certainly participate in and take customers into the traditional demand response markets. We don't stop there, because you have sites outside of those traditional demand response markets. So we also help customers go into the utility direct programs, to where it's a bill credit, or potentially it's even where the utility pays you directly. And then we also even partner with other aggregators. Actually, we partner with all the other aggregators out there, because everyone has, some aggregators have a specific market where they operate. So instead of saying, well, we don't help you there, is we just partner with that aggregator and say, yes, we'll take you into that program in Arizona, or we'll take you into that program in New Orleans. So the whole point here is that we automate the participation in all those, not just the auto DR programs, but everything. So if it's a random email coming from Portland General Electric, we're going to take that random email, gets turned into an auto DR signal, and gets passed on through, in this case, which is really efficient, through Phoenix and through EDX and Demand Manager. So getting there, though, the customization part. Instead of saying, here's the program, do you fit or do you not? Can you reduce load for 6 hours or can you not? What we do is we take it from a different approach, and we say, what can you do? And we have some suggestions on what different folks can do, specifically retail and supermarkets. But what we do is, instead of saying, let's enroll you for this many KW and you have to participate in all these hours, is we back into what you're able to do. And Art will be able to talk to this specifically, but we determine, based on if you're going to adjust temperatures a couple degrees. Well, great. We're only going to put you in for 1 or 2 hours, right? Program still may already be called for 6 hours, but we're going to split that up among customers so that you get smaller pieces, much easier to digest, as opposed to the traditional programs. Once you do this, then there's multiple revenue streams. There's demand response, there's price response, there's demand charge management. So there's all these other attributes that come out of that. And again, none of this is costing you, because you've hinged it on the back of a demand response program or some type of demand program. So in the next slide, there really is something everywhere. There's not something in every city of all these states, but in Oregon, there's the Portland General program. In Louisiana, there's Entergy New Orleans. Like there's all these other programs that exist outside of those darker color states, which is where more of the traditional DR programs live. Even in Alaska, you got a $13 demand charge. Like there's savings that can be drawn from those, right? And again, when you automate your entire portfolio of sites, like through Phoenix, then it just makes sense to use those automations to capture those savings in all these other markets. And the next slide, what we're really trying to communicate is, the simplicity of it. So the way we work with you is we essentially pull up all your sites, we run them through a database, and we come back to you and say, hey guys, here's all the programs. And we say, here's all the programs that aren't a good fit for you because they're really long or they require some minimum load reduction. And then we give you a narrowed down view. And then we help you figure out, okay, what makes sense for you, what doesn't. From that list, we go away with marching orders and come back with these binders just to say, hey, here's the binder, here's the enrollment packet, right? Not pepper you with different forms along the way and muscle you along the, so we make it easy. Once you're enrolled, that's really the hardest part, because participating in a program, what we do with Phoenix is we can turn on, we've turned on hundreds of sites with Phoenix within a day or two, because the integration that we've set up, it's based on AutoDR. It doesn't require down to the site level programming, so it's extremely efficient. So that a week later or the next month, you're actually in market participating, and then ultimately getting paid for that participation or saving money by participating in those programs. Yeah, perfect. So there's, you might be listening to this and thinking, okay, I can't do demand response. I'm not going to dim my lights. I'm not going to take down every other aisle of lighting. I'm not going to turn off the TVs that I'm trying to sell. The very base level of kind of the low hanging fruit is HVAC, and it's not a lot of HVAC, and it's not a long amount of HVAC. Typically, even if you're able to drop a degree or two for an hour or two, there's going to be some type of program to where we can put you in. That's going to happen behind the scenes. That's going to happen without customers or employees knowing. We can even pre-cool leading up to most of those events so that you drop that thermal envelope a bit more, so you can coast through an hour or two of participation. So that, and it really doesn't matter, because whatever controls you have, if you have an overlay there like Phoenix, then those signals are being pushed down from enterprise level. If you want to get more aggressive, sure, lighting, that's an okay place to go. But now that lighting is mostly LED, not great. There's not a lot of load there. There's load cycling technologies within HVAC systems. We can enable those or trigger those. There's case heaters, anti-sweat heaters for supermarkets or convenience stores. And then there's even getting into refrigeration suction pressure. Again, not long. We're not going to go mess with mid-temp cases, but for those low-temp cases, hey, let's play with a couple pounds for an hour or two. We'll keep an eye on it, but that's another good load of, again, invisible load reduction. So what we're doing here is not trying to chase some kilowatt number or committing you to some kilowatt number. What we do is we just say, do the things that you can do, and then whatever kilowatt reductions those yield, we'll put those into a market. We'll bid those into a program. We will set those as price triggers so that next time there's a snowstorm in Texas, that once a price hits a certain level, you implement those measures. Not something painful, just predetermined measures. And those are all set up in EDX, or in this case, actually in Demand Manager within EDX. So right on the next slide, I just want to really quickly show how it all works, because we have AutoDR signals that come in. Only some markets have AutoDR. There's real-time price feeds that come in. Texas, good example, right? Ice storm, prices hit 5,000. Art has said, if prices hit 5,000, put me into DR mode, right? Like, good insurance policy to have in there. But you can set those prices even lower and have those things really modulate on a daily. There's demand response emails, there's weather APIs, there's all the stuff that comes in. And all we're doing is turning all those things into automated signals that communicate very seamlessly with Phoenix, that also end up communicating down to customer sites. In this case, I'm going to hand it over to Art after I show one more slide, which is just, once you set up all these automations, we just give you some really simple tools so you can go in and set your own price triggers. You can set the triggers of when you want those automations to take place. It could, based on where you're buying your block and index power, so you're not eating into your blocks. It could be based on pricing exposure. It can be based on peak load demand. So once you have it set up, there's just all kinds of additional things you could do, like Colin was talking about, to earn and save money. So Art, I'm not, hopefully I didn't steal much of your thunder, but I'll stop talking there.
Thanks, James. Without further ado, our Justice, let's hear from a real customer, kind of talk you through his journey thus far about DR and participating in the grid. Art, welcome.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, James. I'm just going to talk a little bit about, first of all, about Cinemark, and then kind of pull together really the points that have been made already. Some of you are probably familiar with Cinemark. We're headquartered in Plano. We operate 524 theaters, about 6,000 screens in the US and Latin America. Third biggest circuit in the US with 324 theaters and 4,400 screens, 42 states. Just a little bit here, we ranked number 1 and number 2 by box office revenues in 20 of our top 25 US markets as of 2019. Again, just geographically diverse, both in the US and Latin America. And then we had a presence in 15 of the top 20 metropolitan areas in South America as of 12/31/20. We're the largest exhibitor in Brazil. Just a little background about us. Obviously, we operate movie theaters. That's our business. So first of all, we've always had a desire to participate in demand response. We've really tried to do it, I would say, for the last 15 years or so in fits and starts, because it fits our energy management strategy. We've done a lot of work in that area. It also fits our ESG and CSR programs, a desire to contribute to the grid in a positive way, and also be a good corporate citizen. In terms of implementation, it's always just been very difficult. Again, 15 years ago, we were looking at hardware solutions, and that's just not something that either we or, quite frankly, the demand response providers felt justified investing in all that hardware and controls. And as we've learned, those things over time tend to have to be replaced anyway or upgraded. The ability to participate in the duration of events we've touched on. We don't have a lot of lighting load to give back. So it's really about HVAC. We have to be able to control that very carefully because comfort is king for us. So again, wanted to participate, but those two things, duration, we tried participating a couple of years ago in a 6-hour program, and we always had the option to opt out. We did end up opting out a lot, and quite frankly, it just took up a lot of time. So in terms of enrollment, again, a lot of paperwork. If we were doing it ourselves, Enersponse makes it really easy. James kind of went over the process, and I can tell you that we do a phone call every other week, and that's about all it takes. We have the information to provide them. They do all the heavy lifting, so that part has been super easy. And again, he mentioned kind of aggregating sites, and that's what really makes it work for us. We can't take on penalties. So by aggregating with other sites, we avoid all possibility of any penalties, because we're not going to make enough money to justify risking penalties. Automation, obviously, the kind of the key to the whole thing for us. And the partnership between Phoenix and Enersponse really enables that automation. We've invested time and money over the years to with Phoenix to get our systems all connected. This is just another way to leverage that investment that we've made. So in a moment, we're going to take a look at the dashboard as kind of a single pane of glass that that Enersponse provides. James mentioned that earlier. And so just wanted to talk a little bit about tracking, and that's also visible on the dashboard. But Enersponse tracks all the events, as James mentioned. They also track settlements, which doesn't show up on this screen, but under my org, if you click on that and do the drop down, then there's a list of all our settlements, which, honestly, sometimes in the past, I'll get a call from accounts payable going, "Hey, where does this check go?" And I have to dig around trying to find an email or something, well, that's now all on the dashboard. So very helpful, makes it seamless with our accounts payable department. In terms of the money, we're not getting rich on this, but again, it's found money, and we've really been pleasantly surprised so far at how much money we've gotten versus the amount of effort that we've had to put out to do this. So again, on the dashboard, as you can see down at the bottom, it shows the number of locations, available capacity, the events that we participated in, CO2 impact. You can see the map. If you zoom in on the map, you start to see all the different sites in a granular fashion that have been enrolled. And then you'll see the price signals below, and the dots change color as the price signals change. Also shows any events scheduled today and currently scheduled events. So again, just a single pane of glass that really allows you to track kind of everything you're doing in demand response. And I can honestly say it's never been so easy for us. In fact, we've done several events where we've just not even noticed that an event was happening, and then later checked in on comfort and had absolutely no comfort problems. So the automation is working, and we've been super pleased.
Thanks very much, Art. Was really appreciate you joining us and giving a concrete example. I think to wrap it up here and make sure that we have some time for Q&A, kind of key takeaways here are demand response in 2022 and going forward is not nearly what it used to be. Again, to James's point, this is not your mom's or your dad's DR where you call up a foundry and tell them to turn off their blower. To really take advantage and implement a best practice in an enterprise, you have to leverage technology partner who could give you the control and execution layer at scale. You need to leverage partners who understand all of the different programs and the nuances and what's going to make sense for you guys and be a fit, what's not going to be a fit, and to automate that entire process and give you really good visibility in terms of what is your performance, and hold the line and be responsible for if there are comfort issues, how do we treat the program and make sure that we're not making people uncomfortable or not, letting the ice cream melt. With that said, we've kind of approached the end in terms of next steps. This is recorded and can be available to all of you. You can visit the website, and these links will be available to all of the attendees. The Cinemark success story, working with Phoenix. We've got a lot of other really extremely relevant content. If you are someone who manages a portfolio and want to get a sense for what is the economic opportunity for DR across your portfolio, an energy assessment is a very lightweight process to be able to, for us to be able to look at with our partners and tell you what's possible, what's available across your portfolio. And then of course, there should be links here for you guys to send follow-up questions. I know that we have a little extra time, and I see there are some, I believe, some chat questions. So without further ado, I think we can go into the Q&A portion of the presentation. Okay. So you guys are welcome to stick up hands, ask any questions. I don't know if I can see it quite as well on my end. I'm going to click stop share. Do we have questions? Open up Q&A. Colin, while we're waiting folks to think and be creative, you work with a lot of large retailers and help them develop strategies around demand management. What are some common questions or maybe pushback that you get when they start to look at and start to think about how they take advantage of managing flexibility and demand?
I think it's really all comfort. I mean, that's really everything that in terms of the pushback that I get is Am I going to get complaints? Am I going to get more truckloads? That's really, you know, a lot of times is the facility, you know, the facility managers, the last thing they want are more HVAC calls because the associates in the store think it's hot. Oh man, it's hot. The AC is not running. I can't hear it running. I worked for a retailer. We used to joke that if we could just put a speaker on the HVAC systems, our maintenance calls would go way down just because people, you know, they think they don't hear it running. It's not working, right? So it's all around comfort. So I think it's really important that when you do that, you come up with metrics and standards to show that, okay, during these demand response events, we didn't have any, you know, the number of maintenance calls matches what we had not during the event. So that's really, you know, I think in terms of pushback, because, you know, the program makes so much sense. That's all it is. It sounds too good to be true. We're not going to make people mad, right? That's what I've seen.
That makes sense. I see another question, James, I think is a good one for you. And that is, how is demand response participation different if you have multiple controls, EMS solutions versus just one system? And I know you on the market side have seen this. Maybe you can kind of articulate that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's, we certainly work with different organizations that have various EMS providers. So, and often that can be work, right? Because we're having to do some type of programming at the EMS level or at the vendor level to, yeah, I won't name names, but I mean, the companies that you all use. So whether it's multiple systems or one system, we can do those system level integrations so that like we have one particular retailer that has 3 different control systems. So what we do in our platform is they're grouped by control system. Each one of those control systems receives a slightly different message, but it executes the same measure at the end. So this is one of my favorite things about Phoenix is because even if you have multiple controls or EMS systems, any of our customers that have those multiple systems that are using Phoenix, we don't have to worry about that site level EMS programming anymore. It all just goes through Phoenix, through EDX and then through Demand Manager, so that kind of how you're viewing that single pane, you're now getting single pane distribution of your DR events, regardless of the EMS vendor. So I see just to answer the other 2 bullet points on there, there are no financial penalties. Well, we don't pass through penalties. Any good curtailment service provider should protect you from those penalties altogether. And then there's the information that we need is we can start with something as simple as a site list, right? A list of addresses with zip codes, and we run that through the database first, and then we come back to you and say, okay, well, here's what's needed for these sites in this market. Here's what's needed for these in this program. But that's a pretty fluid thing that we usually turn around thousands of sites in a day with a needs list.
You know, one additional add there is that it's easy to discount sites that have legacy and legacy really old systems. They have different levels of BS functionality. You know, one of the things that we do in terms of the multiple environment is we integrate kind of all of those legacies into a single platform so they can all participate. And I think having an understanding of the limitations, you know, more modern control systems are going to allow much more nuanced and granular control versus older ones might be more complex. But going into a single platform is going to make it a lot easier for folks like James, who are really focused their time on making sure that they provide the load to the load serving entity who's paying for it. There is a question here, James. I think that's a good one for you as well. Do you need utility grade meters on a location to participate? Oh, James, you're on mute.
I knew it was going to happen at some point. It depends on the market. Most markets, we do not require that. There are some programs that are just real sticklers about that. But at those times, we can either install secondary metering if required, or if you have any type of CTs or on-site metering through your building management system, we also pull that data through as well, which we're also able to do through Phoenix.
That's right. Thank you, James. Looking at some other questions. I have a good comment here. We enjoyed Sing 2 at Cinemark last weekend. Nice to be back in the theaters. This is true. Go to visit your local Cinemark. Let me see some other questions here. How does one sign in or sign up? Who do we contact? You know, you're welcome to contact us at Phoenix or James, even Colin. You know, his business, they provide consulting services to help people understand. You know, any of the contact information that here's on this website is you can start kind of in any of the three places. From a Phoenix perspective, we can tell you, give you a good assessment in terms of what can be applicable to your, based on your controls infrastructure from a monitoring and a control platform perspective. This is the area where we're going to give you the best, I think, visibility in terms of what can be accomplished, what kind of savings can be delivered via monitoring, but also DR. And then James and Colin could start to think about what are the opportunities that exist, and you know which ones are worth going after, and which ones maybe are just kind of might be worth passing on. Okay, well, guys, it's 1:44. I think we've. I'm seeing we're getting the red flag. I want to thank Colin and James and Art for joining us today on the first of several additional webinars that Phoenix we're going to be hosting here. We have one coming up in February and March. You should see a link to that if you guys want to learn a little bit more about the nuances of demand response in 2022. And again, thank everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your week.